Out of every single Star Wars film that has been released by this point, I think it can be truly said that my most favorite and greatest would be Revenge of the Sith. I had always had an affinity for the prequels when I was young, and loved every single one of them no matter what the opinion was at the time, and when I actually saw the faults in the dialogue myself and some of the story, that still never really ruined the experience that I had to begin with. It was just a nice extension that added to the story that George Lucas was trying to tell, the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, where the only thing that could eventually ruin that was the sequels themselves, taking all of that focus away while still billing those three as part of his story they deemed the Skywalker Saga. It was just that the themes of the prequels were much darker in tone to the lighthearted action adventure that most of us grew up with the originals, or what Disney tried to attempt to recreate in the sequels themselves. It included a variety of things like politics and war and philosophy, virtually representing a variety of adult themes for my kid brain to learn about at the time, and I think George Lucas did a great job in showing that. The essence of these films are not only a gateway of escape to another universe, but a lesson about the dangers present in society itself, and it all culminates in the epic of Revenge of the Sith, the highest point anyone could ever experience in Star Wars, and not many fans would ever disagree with that, nor would critics ever disagree that this is the best prequel film that's ever been made, and one of the top 5 Star Wars films of all time. But I will admit that I never really held that up in high regard when I was younger, holding that spot for Return of the Jedi being the final conclusion that I love to this day. My second favorite Star Wars movie that now ended the story of Anakin and birthed a new era of Luke and the Jedi and a new Republic after defeating the Emperor. But even enjoying that and most Star Wars films that have faint happy endings, Revenge of the Sith remains to be the darkest out of them all, at the tail end of the Clone Wars and the fall of the Republic. And this film remains to be a staple out of all of Star Wars content by this point, with things like Order 66 contributing to the fall of the Jedi and the rise of tyrannical dictatorship that was always constantly told in newer Star Wars content. This film truly represents what the prequels had always been about and how the galaxy was left in a broken state that we saw back in A New Hope, where the Jedi Order is extremely involved in politics of the Republic that is under the complete influence of the Dark Lord of the Sith, Sheev Palpatine, who finalizes the Sith plans of revenge cooked up over 1,000 years with the rule of 2, slowly chipping away at the false promises of democracy. That's not to say that the previous 2 entries were unnecessary, because they certainly are just as important as this one for the overall story, but this is one that puts all of the ideas that George had together to form that missing piece that was unseen when Star Wars first came out in the 70s and 80s, and I really couldn't ask for anything better, except in the case of an extended cut that should be re-released in theaters. The real shining element of this entire film is Anakin himself, and Hayden Christensen does a fantastic job at portraying him throughout this film, and the fact that he's coming back in the newer productions is amazing and a testament to how much we actually love to see him portray him in these films that only get better throughout time. It's a portrayal of conflict and a formation and forging between 2 distinct personalities, the tragic Jedi who is doing his best for his own family and friends, and the Dark Lord of the Sith enraged at everyone who betrayed him and lays down an iron fist at those who oppose the Empire. Of course, that's not to say that this film is not without any faults, which there still clearly are, as with the case of most of the prequels, but those elements themselves are actually what make this film special to begin with, no matter how wacky they are. But the main point of this movie centrally ties the idea of Anakin dividing between the wants of the Sith and the needs of the Jedi. The Jedi in this film are portrayed as arrogant, self-centered, ignorant fools who are strict to what pertains within their own code and letting the dealings of the Force overall dictate their decisions in the process. This film also really puts in the war in Star Wars, showing the full extent of the Clone Wars seen on screen at the very beginning of the film when our heroes dive straight into battle to rescue Palpatine. It reflects back on the relationship that Obi-Wan and Anakin built and the journey that they have taken together throughout the majority of the Clone Wars within the span of a few minutes, just before they're about to face Count Dooku once again. This is also where we are introduced to Palpatine's full plans set into motion within the death of Dooku, a point of realization for him and the audience about the untrustworthiness and manipulation of the Sith that will be done to Anakin, how Dooku was only the face of conflict to drive the stake into the heart of the Republic, and how all of these nasty things he had done under Sidious's orders to try to replace the corrupt government of the Republic just resulted in his own dark plans to rule the galaxy to take fold as the devil. All the things that he did in his past with the things that he lost in his Padawan, Qui-Gon, were for nothing, and all he can do is accept his fate of the situation at Anakin's hands, who is control of the situation. It's one that also sets up the burning conflict for his character throughout the film, tossing with the idea of following the ways of the Jedi, feeling so disillusioned yet so somehow scared of what he has done, killing an unarmed man that could have been served better captured rather than straight up murdered as told by the Chancellor Chancellor of the Republic. But the thing is that no one actually seems to mind where the Jedi Council moves on to get Grievous to end the war. His achievements in this moment were actually praised by the public, finally returning safe with his wife with the news of Padme's pregnancy at the beginning of Luke and Leia. And this becomes a new high for Anakin and a chance of raising a child while still dealing with the strictness of the Jedi Code. And this is what sets him dealing with constant visions of distress, of something similar to what we saw happen to his own mother in Attack of the Clones, which actually came true when she died in his arms, where now he has to do whatever he takes to protect Padme and that child from dying.
It was only a dream.
I won't let this one become real.
Constantly throughout the prequels, Anakin has to suffer throughout loss, with leaving his mother to learn the ways of the Jedi, to losing her while being one, and finally having that forbidden love with a new baby along the way. We see him seek help with the Jedi, but they keep telling him to let go of these attachments, to adhere to the natural way of life and the order of the Jedi, that these visions would only cause suffering, which actually does little to help his situation, as we find out most of these visions are actually the future of his life, and he becomes a part of a self-fulfilling prophecy that is destined for the Chosen One. On the other hand, only now at the 11th hour of the war does the Jedi also become wary of the Chancellor and his emergency powers, how everything about his power that he holds has gone too far with the Republic that usually stipulates, where it acts as a complete 180 of the Jedi's character, who previously went along with Palpatine's plans and are now trying to get more involved in the government and politics more than they should be. This is where we see their ignorance has become quite clear to the audience throughout the entire film, not heeding the warnings of Dooku about the return of the Sith that started way back on Naboo and manipulating the Republic from the very inside, playing right into his hands when Palpatine wishes to appoint Anakin to the Jedi Council, something that they do not want within their own rules and only allows it because they want to spy on what exactly are his plans, all without making Anakin a master, as most Jedi Council members are masters themselves.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What?
An event that enrages Anakin, playing back into Palpatine's plans to cause distrust amongst them, that they refuse to give him such a rank that is amongst the council because of this unusual event, and also feeling like they had hardly acknowledged most of what he had done to achieve for them during the war. This is actually also the beginning of the rift in the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan, who wants to adhere to most of the council but still recognizes that they are wrong in most cases, as with what happened back to his Padawan Ahsoka and so forth, where the Jedi asked something very ill-advised against their teachings on a public figure that would surely destroy their reputation amongst the public, to far abuse their own powers directly dealing with the government. And this causes much conflict within Anakin that upsets him when talking to his wife, dealing with the fact of his premonitions about her death, while also going to Palpatine to learn more, to which he is also well aware of the fact that the Jedi are trying to spy on him through Anakin, and sets off this idea of the Jedi wanting to take control of the Republic.
The Jedi Council want control of the Republic. They're planning to betray me.
Turning against the Republic because they want power and are afraid of Anakin's power to stop that. Which, to be fair, in this case, he isn't actually far off from the truth with his own lies and manipulations. When they do things in this film, they do it against their own code and act from the stubbornness of their own sheltered ways. And this is the best scene that Star Wars actually had to offer, with Ian McDiarmid's impeccable acting playing a manipulative demon knowing what Anakin wants to fulfill his own desires to rule the galaxy and destroy the Jedi Order.
The Sith rely on their passion for their strength. They think inwards, only about themselves.
And the Jedi don't.
It's where he finally sets the seed in his mind and captures him within his grasp to learn the ways of the Sith, to keep Padme from dying and use the facade of democracy to turn everyone against him. It's one that makes Darth Plagueis a legendary figure who has never appeared on screen, but it still retains an impact among Star Wars fans that we see today, and that's what the beauty that Revenge of the Sith has to offer amongst the rest. This is also the point of the film that separates its main characters away from each other, with various Jedi going off to different places, where Anakin stays on assignment with Palpatine, Yoda goes to Kashyyyk to help the Wookiees, and then Obi-Wan goes to Utapau to finish off General Grievous. This divergent path represents the final time that we would see Anakin throughout the eyes of Obi-Wan and so forth, and the final turn before the new order takes hold. And when we see Obi-Wan succeed in taking down Grievous and virtually ending the war as it is, this is a chance where Palpatine finally reveals himself to Anakin to give him the choice that would change the galaxy, to send Mace Windu with his knowledge to try to stop him for good when all of their worst fears fears come to pass and Palpatine finally tries to turn him to the dark side. And as hopeful as I tried to be throughout the film when I was young, it was only going to end one way, where Anakin still looks out to see his wife and try to do whatever he can to save her, with Palpatine constantly in his head, jumping into action to confront Windu and Sidious to make that choice. And the one that he makes might have ruined the galaxy for good, where despite gaining the match upper hand against the Sith, Anakin still stops him at the death and Sidious finally kills Windu, anointing him as his apprentice, birthing the Galactic Empire and Order 66. And as all fans of Star Wars know, Order 66 is actually the true turning point in all of Star Wars that birthed everything that we have come to know about this day. Not because it started everything in Star Wars, but it added something that influenced the world that we saw it from its very beginning in A New Hope, with this montage of destruction of the entire Jedi Order, where the temple is set ablaze as the Jedi become no more, as Anakin slaughters younglings and removes a part of himself as Darth Vader, cementing their status as figures of legends only 20 years after the events of this film. It's at this point where you can actually feel how dark the film has truly become, where Obi-Wan and Yoda are shocked at the betrayal of the clones, Padme, and some of the Senators that are stunned and crying at the destruction of the Republic being formed into this benevolent empire, where the galaxy starts to feel the weight of being controlled take in. And it only gets worse from here on out, where Obi-Wan discovers the truth out of it all. The Dark Lord of the Sith has taken Anakin under his wing and slaughtered younglings under his command. And this is a fact that Yoda recognizes as the true birth of Darth Vader and the death of Anakin Skywalker. Most people at this point tend to think that when he puts on the mask, he is Darth Vader, but it is actually the moment where he actually gives himself to Palpatine is where he actually does. And this is where we see him lose the shred of the Jedi that he once was, with friends with Obi-Wan, the husband to Padme, and the hero of the Republic. Because we can see clearly his eyes turn that Sith yellow, and all of his actions are of the heinous type that only the Sith can do, and the most evil out of all of the galaxy. This also becomes a new burden for Obi-Wan, because he now has to face his former apprentice to the death, because Sidious is just too powerful for him to handle, and that remains to be Yoda's task. And now, for the two of them, they must stop this dictatorship at all costs, where he delivers the final blow to the pawns known as the Separatist Council, finally doing away with all the twos that Sidious used back in Phantom Menace and so forth. This also sets off something in Padme not believing the truth that Obi-Wan was saying with the news that Anakin has turned to the dark side, investigating herself to discover the truth while the galaxy burns, only to find that that really happened. It's also at this point where we actually see the glimpses of sadness within Anakin's eyes after he slaughters the Separatist Council, knowing in secret that he did something wrong and is suffering as a result. His entire journey in throughout the Skywalker saga is nothing but suffering as the world collapses around him, becoming a slave to a new master each time he tries to escape, where he can do virtually nothing. A slave to Watto, a slave to the Jedi, and now a slave to the Sith. But it's when he tries to convince himself that this is the new reality he wants when he can protect Padme in this moment, throughout the power hungriness of Darth Vader himself, but also suddenly realizes that that isn't what she wants any a part of, only seeing a shadow of his own past come out, where Obi-Wan finally appears and he tries to choke her to death before Obi-Wan stops him in the moment.
You thunder against me!
You have done that yourself!
Coming face to face with his former master to commit the most epic battle that Star Wars has ever seen. Like literally, this is the best Star Wars fight that has ever been committed, and nothing can ever come close. That culminates the ancient arts of the older world and the emotional battles that were present in the originals. This is all juxtaposed with Yoda fighting Palpatine, having 2 and 2 go at each other to try to stop it, where one does finally come out top, where good wins on one side and bad wins on the other, further cementing the injuries that Vader would be known for. And this is the most emotional moment out of the entire film, where Kenobi pours out his sadness for what happened. The Jedi are now destroyed, and the Force is left unbalanced by the Chosen One, where all Anakin can do is spew out hate for everything he sees, but it's actually not at Obi-Wan, but actually at himself in Darth Vader. You might see it this way, where he just says "I hate you" to Obi-Wan, but what you see on the inside is actually his heart being slowly destroyed by this new figure of hate known as Darth Vader, where even he would proclaim that he destroyed Anakin to Obi-Wan years later. How Darth Vader finally crippled Anakin for life and taken over when Sidious come to rescue him, and finally finishes the origin of his very character. And I think this is absolutely a great way to portray Vader and add Padme side by side as they're being operated on machines to literally give birth to the newer generations, to Vader and both to Luke and Leia, which sadly causes the death of Padme in the process for losing what she loved in Anakin, a loss that truly affects him, cementing him to the dark side as he completes a self-fulfilled prophecy subservient to evil as part of the plans of the very Force in the path of the Chosen One. And then, this is where we finally get to establish how each character ends up back in the originals, having Leia live with Senator Organa and Luke with his uncle and aunt, while Obi-Wan keeps a watchful eye over him, giving a new birth to a new hope for the galaxy. So as you can see, Revenge of the Sith, although flawed by many in the past, still holds a lot of weight as the center point of the story of Star Wars, and that's what makes it a true masterpiece, with the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker and the fall of the Republic making its elements better than all the others and darker than it should, supposedly ending one story on a bad note where the rest tried to be upbeat and happy and the sequels just tried to copy all of that. I just really couldn't ask for a better experience while enjoying this film while I was a child, or even more so as an adult, and it will still continue to remain that way for the rest of time. So I just want to say now to thank you for George Lucas for creating an unforgettable story for an unforgettable franchise with the life lessons of politics and life itself portrayed in this new fictional fantasy world that we have all enjoyed. So with that said, that's all I have to say, so may the Force be with you.